Good afternoon. Welcome to this webinar on moving to France. It's clearly something hundreds of you are trying to do at the moment by the demand on our website and the things we're hearing from our agents. Currently, 150,000 Brits live in France, and it looks like there's going to be a few more by the end of the year because of this tidal wave of Brits trying to buy at the moment. We're going to talk about all the aspects related to that. My name's Liz Rowlinson, I'm a property journalist, and I'm going to get my panelists to introduce themselves. And so Joanna Leggett.
Hi Liz, I'm Joanna Leggett. We run Leggett Immobilier, which is probably one of the biggest British agencies in France. We've got about 15,000 properties for sale in France, and we cover all regions. So all our agents live and work here, and we'll be happy to help you with your search.
Thank you. Barbara?
Hello everybody, bonjour. I am an English qualified solicitor. I work with Ashton's Legal, and we trade as Heslop and Platt from our office in Leeds. So I spend my time helping people who are buying in France. We also get involved in other legal aspects if people die living in France, or divorce, or so on. So we're always dealing with a property in France.
Brilliant. And Robert, Kent.
Yes, hello. Now I'm the director of Kentingtons. We're tax and investment consultants. We help people move to France to understand the tax implications of their move, as well as many of the legal implications of moving to France. So we're there as a council to help people realise their ambitions of making that move.
Brilliant. So there's a few key deadlines as we approach Brexit and the end of the transition period. We're going to just ask our audience about their intentions to get an idea before we crack on with covering all the bases. We've got a question, when do you realistically think you will move to France? Is it A, this year, B, next year, or C, maybe you're not completely sure if you're moving full time yet? Maybe you're going to just get a holiday home. So we'll see what comes up. Brilliant. So there is a bit of a mix. 42% people are not sure, 26% before the end of this year, next year 21%, and as soon as possible 11%. So yeah, I mean, clearly it's great to see flights back to France back on the agenda, and I know a few people have already headed to France. Joe, is it pretty much back to normal in terms of your business, or not yet?
Well, business-wise, we've been really extremely busy, but that's also because the domestic market, the French market, have been buying up as well. A lot of people, Parisians, for example, are trying to move to countryside locations since COVID, of course. Not all the airlines are flying back to France yet. There are still some that are waiting sort of until maybe the 10th of July, because at the moment, for example, into Bordeaux, you still can't fly to Bordeaux. So most of the clients that we see are coming over actually driving over. So the destinations like Brittany, Normandy, Pas-de-Calais, we're really, really busy with viewings, because obviously they can hop over in half an hour, or on the train, you know, the Eurotunnel or whatever. And obviously when flights start coming back in, then we'll see more of the south viewings, etc., pick up. But at the moment, anyone who can drive here seems to be driving here. Since this week, we are stacked up with viewings.
Do you think, yeah, I was having a chat with your rentals division this morning, actually, and he was saying that the appetite for the northern western parts, do you think that the people will go off the south permanently because of the air travel issue, or not?
I think we're quite lucky in France, because even in the south, I mean, if you wanted to go to, you know, the Côte d'Azur, for example, it's 12 hours from Calais. So it's still achievable in a day. I think as you go into other countries, you know, it might take 2 days, or you may have to stop off in France. So that although I think at the moment people are rethinking how they're going to travel, you know, a lot of people are still scared about flying. You know, and with the pandemic, it might come back, it might not come back. So the sort of all the way down to the Charente and the sort of Dordogne regions, where you can get there, you know, within 6 hours from a port, are extremely popular at the moment. But I don't think we can count out the south, because it is obviously, there are routes to get there. You know, even the Alps, you can be there in 8 hours in the car. So I think France will still be quite popular, you know, as opposed to other areas where you really do have to fly to because you can't drive there.
Brilliant. And now this is essentially about residency, but I'm sure we'll answer a few wider questions. And if you've got any questions, do ping, there's a question logo on the right-hand panel. So do fire in some questions as we go along, and we'll try to get through as many as possible. But Jo, could you just briefly clarify that the French government website for Britons applying for residency has been pushed back from the 1st of July to October now, hasn't it?
Yes, that's right. So for all of us living here, we can't now apply for our carte séjour until October. It was supposed to be on the 1st of July, but obviously with the pandemic, everything's been pushed back a few months. The deadline for Brexit, though, hasn't changed, and that still is December. So if you are looking at becoming a resident in France, you do need to get here before that date to be entitled to all the rules that we're all entitled to as being residents in France. So deadline-wise, if you're actually buying a property, realistically, you need to be putting an offer in before the end of September, because most sales will take 3 to 4 months to go through. And you need to be here, and you need to register at the prefecture to say that you've actually moved to France and have proof of your address to claim residency before that date. So those dates are quite important. I wouldn't give up hope, though, because you can rent if you haven't found somewhere. But don't go into rentals thinking, oh, I'll go and rent somebody's Jeep for a few weeks and, you know, that'll get me residency. You would need to prove that you have a French bank account and a French address and a contract for that rental property, and also some form of a bill, like a utility bill for that property. Then you can approach the prefecture and say that you have fully moved to France, even though it's a rental property.
Brilliant. Barbara, I know Jo just flagged up that it takes 3 to 4 months to buy a property in France. Do you, is that what you're seeing? And are you seeing a rush of people trying to sort of start the process and push it along?
Yes, absolutely. In the last, I would say 2 to 3 weeks, we've seen a definite increase in the number of people contacting us saying that they've been looking and they've now got a viewing trip arranged, or they're already in France and they've already found something that they want to buy. So as Jo mentioned, you really need to expect that the purchase will take between 3 and 4 months, and that's from when you make an offer and the offer is accepted. It is difficult to actually speed up that process. There are certain formalities that have to be completed in France, so it is difficult to push it through more quickly. And if you're going to make your purchase conditional on anything like getting a mortgage in place, then that can take extra time. So you really need to be very well organized, have all your financial information ready, so that as soon as you find the property, you can then submit your mortgage application to the French bank and get things moving, because it does take a long time, and I'm afraid to say that French banks are quite slow. Also, if you want to have a survey done, you need to make contact with one of the surveyors early on, so that you can have them lined up and ready to go in and inspect the property for you before you actually sign the first contract. And again, the surveyors are getting very busy, so you need to sort of get all your ducks in a row so that you're ready to move quite quickly if you're going to be sure of getting the purchase completed by the end of December. So for some people, it's going to be quite a tight deadline, could become quite stressful. And also be aware that December the 31st is also the end of the French tax year. And so the notaires tend to be quite busy pushing through transactions for the French nationals that they are working for. So the notaires are always busy at that time of year. So it's going to be quite a tricky period, I think. So the sooner you can get a property, the sooner you can get the wheels in motion, the better.
Brilliant. So being a cash buyer does speed up the process a bit.
Sorry?
Being a cash buyer does speed up the process.
Most definitely, yes.
Right.
Yes.
Brilliant.
And actually, Liz, that you don't actually, even if, as long as you can prove residency by December, the French government have allowed until June 2020 to apply for the carte séjour. So
Yes.
as long as you're in your property by December, you still have time to apply for the actual carte séjour until June.
Brilliant. Okay. And I hear what Barbara's saying about needing to get your ducks in a row and preparation. And Robert, I mean, there's key things to think about, isn't there, before you even start looking at those gorgeous, you know, Provençal houses near where you live. I mean, what are the key considerations about, you know, financially planning in terms of your purchase?
Yeah, you need to think about inheritance planning, where you're going to keep things like your money, where you're going to get your income from. Lots of our clients certainly are living off capital, and they need to think, can I leave it where it is, or can I need to move it? If so, where to? How's it going to be treated for tax in France? Succession rules, and then have things like how to purchase the property. You're going to look at property, how am I going to do this? What are my objectives? And actually, lots of people we talk to, we ask them, well, what do you want to happen? Well, we don't really know. Well, you need to talk about that. And you need to have that discussion before you start looking at property. But the amount of people that don't even know what their budget's going to be and things like that, where people will look around the property and they'll have what the French will call a coup de cœur, which means they'll see this fantastic property, they have to have it. They were just testing the market, but actually they found something and they just have to have it now. And all planning just goes completely out the window. So very important, really, before you start looking, you start thinking of all these more down-to-earth things before looking at the property.
Very good advice. Yeah, I think one of our presenters would say you ask the man and you ask the woman, and sometimes they haven't even had that sort of proper discussion when they're appearing on the TV show to find their property. So yeah. So basically, you've mentioned the fact that long-term rentals, Joe, are an option if people aren't realistically gonna, you know, buy their property in time. Because I mean, you need to look around, don't you, often to find the right property?
Yeah, location is massively important. I think we found, well, we've got a sales support team here, and they said they've noticed a massive difference in the fact that people really, over this COVID time in lockdown, people have really done a lot of research. And whereby they'll be coming in sort of normally saying, we're not quite sure, we might like this area, we're not sure about this area. They're actually coming in with actual areas, because I think the time that they've had to spend at home, people have done quite a lot of research. But yes, you can rent in an area if you're not 100% sure. The winter months are always the best time to do your research, because if you like it in the winter, you're going to love it in the summer. You'll be able to see what's open in the winter months, because a lot of villages might close down completely because they're tourist towns. And if it's a permanent move, then you want to make sure that you're living in a, you know, in a working community where people are there all year round. So the winter is still a good time. And rentals, you know, as long as you can prove your income for rentals, you only need to give a month's notice. So you could do from 3 months, 6 months to a year if you're looking for a property. And it also gives you a chance to try the area before you buy. So, you know, don't give up hope. If you don't make an offer before the end of December, you can still rent, of course.
Brilliant. And Joe, I've just had a question in from Helen Burns that she says, I mentioned a rental division, but a Leggett, she didn't believe Leggett did actually have one, but it's quite new, isn't it? And it's actually part of your property management division, I should have said.
Yes, that's right. We've only just recently, during the confinement, have set up a property management consultancy business, so we can look after holiday homes, we can rent holiday homes, etc. And we are sort of maintaining properties as well. So it is a new service which we will launch at the beginning of August. So it will appear on our website from then, and you know, you will be able to use that service as well.
Great. And a question for you, Robert. Rosemary Gillett asks, well, if you need to prove your income, would 3 years accounts as a self-employed person be acceptable?
Usually, yeah. I mean, yeah, that's you need 3 years as a self-employed, but other people need less. But yeah, if you've got 3 years accounts, that's usually good enough for most lenders.
Brilliant. Okay. All right. So So, of course, there's the possibility that we might reach some kind of bilateral agreement with France in the meantime on healthcare or any of the issues. Is that right, Jo?
Healthcare, we're still not sure on. I mean, if you're working in France like myself or anybody else who's paying, into the tax system, you'll be entitled to the same healthcare as French people or non-Europeans, which means you'll get 70% and you need to take the 30% top-up insurance. Where we're still unsure is whether it will still be reciprocal between the UK and France for retirees, or whether they're going to need to just take out full private healthcare. At this stage, we still don't know. So it will be towards the end of the year, I imagine, when we will be told this. We do imagine that there will be something reciprocal between France and the UK, as a lot of things have been outside of the EU already between the two countries. It's not as if we're like, for example, the United States, who, is massively far away. There are more French living in the UK than there are Brits living in France. So we do expect that there will be something reciprocal to do with healthcare.
And Kevin Colvin asks, so what will be the process be post-Brexit? And basically, we should make it clear that obviously there's going to be no difference to the ability of or the legality of British people buying holiday homes. They can still rent them out to make income. Just the process of applying for residency will obviously change, and the freedom of movement will be curtailed. I mean, would applying for a visa be what maybe Americans or South Africans do in France now?
Well,
Robert, anyone?
Well, for Americans, they do. It is a longer process. You can apply for a long-term visa for a year, but then you have to go back to the States to reapply for the second year. And once you've been in the country, going backwards and forwards for 5 years, then you can apply for full residency and you don't need to go back again. That would be the worst case scenario. I don't think that is going to happen between the UK and France, but that is the worst case scenario it could be. The other difference will be holiday homes, the amount of time that you're allowed to stay there as a third country as such, because at the moment you can come and stay for 6 months if you want to. But if we are treated in the same way as other non-European countries, it means that you'll only be able to stay in your holiday home for 3 months, then you'll have to leave for another 3 months and then be able to come back. So you won't have the freedom to be able to stay there as long as you like, but you can rent the property out, of course.
Okay, great. And just touching on healthcare again, Robert, will the EHIC card will not work after the transition period, will it? So as Jo said, it really depends. There's still a lot that's up in the air in terms of supposing, because we had a question from someone called Padayachi who says, I'm 75, I'm thinking of moving to France. Obviously, healthcare will be a key consideration, won't it?
Yeah, it's a complicated one. I mean, for the first 3 months, because the first 3 months you can't join the health system. So the first 3 months of residency, yeah, you'd need at least a temporary form of health cover. Yeah. What happens after that depends on whether you're working, you're retired, have an S1, so have the reciprocal agreement or not. And in which case you can join Puma using what they call the CSM. So you pay a percentage of your taxable income on certain kinds of income, and you can get in that way. So if you're non-active, and that's nothing to do with being in the EU, anyone can join that. So non-EU citizens can join by paying their 8%. So there's many ways of getting into that system after your 3 months of having cover.
Is that what they call cotisations? Is that?
Yeah, that's right. The cotisation subsidiaire maladie. So CSM, probably easier to say. So that's the 8%. So you got a 10,000 allowance, around 10,000 per person in the household. So it's around 20,000 for a couple. And beyond that, you pay 8% of taxable income. What's still a bit unclear is what it's taken on, because the law says it's not taken on pensions, for example, but it's not clear if that doesn't apply to international pensions. So it's still a bit up in the air. And this whole idea that they'll apply it on niveau de vie, which means lifestyle, basically what you spend. And that's still under discussion. So it's quite a fluid situation, really.
Yes. Okay, I've got a very specific question for you, Barbara. You might not you might not know this, but Darren Butt asks, what are the legalities around buying a lake and doing glamping, setting up a glamping site? Would they need extra permissions generally?
Yes, I mean, absolutely. You know, there are national planning rules in France, but there are also local planning rules. So, you know, the starting point is to go to the mairie and find out, you know, what the planning rules in place will allow. But most definitely there are specific rules about glamping, also about lakes, and if they're to be used for public fishing and so on. A lot of regulations, you've got to do your homework, because you can't think we'll just buy a lake and then set up a glamping and a camping site. It's much more complicated than that, and very much, you know, usually managed at a local level, but the national rules apply as well.
Brilliant. Well, Joe, he says he'll be looking at your properties with lakes. Maybe you've got a customer there.
Well, generally speaking, if there is, you know, a property with a lake, if it's already got glamping, then it's quite straightforward. But as Barbara said, they don't give out that many licenses anymore for that type of thing. So it's generally better to try and buy one that's already got some sort of camping around it, and then it could be a, you know, fairly straightforward process. But yeah, we do have lots of lakes for sale as well, which is good.
And Robert, I'm not sure whether we've got a question from David Simon Hart, who says, what about a couple? We get this question quite a lot. What about a couple where one is Irish and the other is British? How does that affect the residency rights?
Well, it just means each one has their own rights. I mean, so if you've got one that's an EU national and one that isn't, one has the absolute right to be there and one not necessarily. Unless they can adopt the other person's nationality, it doesn't change a lot. But you know, I think that as someone that moved here before we had all these rights under EU rules, I think that people are getting very excited about it all ending at the end of the year. I think that the right to be here, and the worry about being allowed to stay and function, there's not that much that's going to be lost. So I spend quite a lot of my time reassuring people that the world doesn't end on the 31st of December. You know, the tax treaty between the UK is nothing to do with the EU and so on. So a lot of the rules and regulations aren't problematic. And bearing in mind that around 30% of all non-French nationals living in France are non-EU. Yeah, they have no problems. So we've got plenty of clients that are non-EU citizens. They have no problems. Yeah, we don't have many issues. So it's not a major problem. The world doesn't end at the end of this year, so it'll be reassuring.
But there's certainly, I mean, I certainly think Brexit, the mood, COVID has certainly pushed a few more people to France. And I only interviewed actually a letter buyer from Leggett who the whole remote working trend has actually persuaded them it's very practical to move to France instead. And Joe, if you're trying to find a school for your family, any sort of advice there? Do you look at an area, then look at the schools? Do you find the school, then think about the area?
It really depends on the age of the children, I would say. Most Brits tend to buy in the rural countryside or the southwest of France, you know, the northern parts, the general areas where there's a lot of space. If the children are sort of under 11, I would definitely suggest that you put them in the local school of the house. The education system in France is brilliant. Loads of our agents have children in schools here that may have moved over, you know, in the last few years. It's better for the children to be in the local school than send them to an international school, because then they'll have local friends. Because if you bear in mind, you know, towns can be 20 minutes apart, villages can be 20 minutes apart, and it's really important for the parents to be able to integrate with the local community. So by going to the local school, which are much smaller classes than they are in the UK, and they'll absorb themselves into the language straight away, and the parents will integrate. So it's much better to find the local schools. You know, it's completely different to how it is in the UK, particularly in the countryside. However, if the children are older, then I would look at international schools, because they're going to find the language barrier quite difficult, particularly if they're doing exams, you know, 14 to 16 or 16 to 18. Then they could put them into international schools, which are in the big cities like Bordeaux or in Nice, etc. And they can board there. They can board there in the week and come back at the weekends, and the education is a lot cheaper here than it is in the UK as well. But I would definitely suggest, I mean, the schools here are lovely. We've got agents all over France, and all of their children are all in the little local schools, some in international. So I would just say, find the area that you like and then go and speak to the Mary. We even make appointments with the Mary in the school, so you can have a look around the school. They grow their own vegetables here for the kitchens and things like that. So it is a really, really nice way of education as well. But I would find your area and then go and have a look at the school yourself.
Great. Just to clear up, we've had quite a few questions clarifying the June 2020 versus June 2021 issue to do with the residency deadline that you mentioned, Joe. It's slightly confusing because we were saying they've got to do it by the end of the year, and then but once you're in France, you have until the end of June 2021 to make your application, isn't it?
Well, they're two different things. The end of December is obviously the Brexit deadline. So for the Brexit deadline, you need to be in France, but to apply for your carte séjour, you have until the following June. So if you want to have the same regulations as we all have already living here, you need to be in France by December, but you still have until June to apply for the carte séjour.
Barbara, you mentioned something.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. Basically, what you need to be able to do by the 31st of December is to prove that you've got a stable residence, okay?
Yeah.
So if you can't complete your house purchase by the 31st of December, then you should be looking to take a 12-month rental contract or even longer. It's been said on a lot of websites and forums that you can't just get a seasonal rental, sort of a 3-month rental, and that would be sufficient to prove a stable residency. So I think the safest option is to try to get something like a 12-month rental contract that you could give notice on sooner if you complete your house purchase in time. But it's all about proving stable residency. Okay.
Yeah.
That's the key, really, to be able to have a piece of paper that proves that before the 31st of December.
Okay, and a question for you, Robert. French tax, does it make sense to take your 25% tax-free lump sum from your UK private pension plan before moving to France, or is it still valid once living in France?
Right. If you're going to take the 25%, then absolutely take it before you move, because the French will happily tax it. They don't care that it's tax-free in the UK. So if you want to take your 25%, absolutely. There are other options, however. You can cash in pensions in the UK, and there are very low taxes on that in France. So the point is, before you do anything, is to find out what the best options are. So we've had lots of people who have said, well, actually, I don't really want my income in sterling because we're committed to being in France. So we actually prefer to cash it in and do something that works in France, that can be in euros, that can be more French tax friendly. And that makes a lot of sense for many people. It obviously depends on the situation. Some pensions can't be cashed in, but that's another option for people. Whereas if you can pay less than 7% tax, whereas you'll pay 40–45% maybe in the UK, which is perfectly possible, then that's another option. But the point is, yes, if you're going to take the 25% and you've decided that's what you're going to do, then very much our advice is do it before you move.
Brilliant. And another question for you, actually, from Lynn Smith. We already have a house and a bank account in France. We'd like to live and work for 6 months in France and live and work in the UK the other 6 months. Very lovely. But how do we approach this? Well, you have to decide where you're tax resident anyway, don't you? Even before the whole Brexit issue.
Yeah, I mean, that's the important thing. And lots of people say to me, where's the best place to be tax resident? And it depends, and it's not a matter of real choice. It depends where you are in the rules. And there's a choice as to how much time, for example, you spend in France. So under the double tax treaty terms, if you spend most of your time in France, you'll be deemed by the French to be resident. So if it's exactly 6 months, 6 months, I would advise anyone not to do exactly that, because that's a dangerous game. I would say 5 months, 7 months, you're fine, but you know, don't play it too close. We've got strong advice. I've seen that go so wrong. Where you know, my daughter got sick, so I had to stay, and then now we've got all sorts of problems with the HMRC, and it's just not worth it. So I wouldn't play that game too tightly if I was them. But then it was perfectly possible that if you're working in the UK, let's say you're employed in the UK, that's taxed in the UK, nice and simple. And what's the activity that takes place in France, taxed usually in France. But the point is, yes, is the answer. It's possible. But I wouldn't play it 6 months, 6 months.
Okay, yeah, it's all about preparation and having the right conversations.
Yeah.
Barbara, and I mean, people wanting to earn an income in France, it's going to be perfectly possible for non-residents to have their gîtes and earn some income, isn't it? But you might not be able to do everything. You might be taxed slightly more if you're non-resident in France after Brexit.
I'm not aware that that is something that could happen, to be perfectly honest. Robert might have a view on that, but you know, a lot of the changes that we've been talking about, as Robert has said, are actually not affected by Brexit. You know, a lot of tax rules and the tax treaty between the UK and France are not going to be affected by Brexit. So in terms of rental income that a UK resident is going to be receiving from a property in France, I'm not aware that that will change. You know, how it's going to be treated. I'm not aware that it will change. It should carry on as currently.
So okay. I missed the point. So this is a non-resident, was it?
Yes.
Yeah, so I mean, the income tax won't change, but the only thing that does change is the potential for the social charges. So we've had the De Ruyter ruling and rulings on social charges. So what we have is the new prélèvement, the solidarité, which is now 7.5%, but 7.5% for European nationals. So stay 17.2 for non-EU nationals. So what we could find is that the EU people are paying 7.5 and us non-EU nationals are paying 17.2 on the social charge. So that's the only difference that I can really see.
Okay. Joe, a couple of questions relating to prices for you. It's the perennial favourite. Are you expecting prices to drop after the pandemic? And B, someone else asks, are prices in northwest France more affordable than the south? That's a big question.
Okay, well, firstly, no. There's been so much pent-up demand for properties because obviously the French domestic market is really, really strong. You know, we've been inundated with French inquiries and French viewings, which is pushing the prices slightly up. In certain places, they're certainly not coming down. I think the problem is the lack of stock, you know, because the market is really moving. And once we get the Brits coming over as well, you know, then there is going to be a lack of stock, I think. And when there's a lack of stock, the prices definitely don't go down. As with regards to the other question, the northwest of France, yes, is a lot more affordable than it is in the south. The south of France, you know, you've got the Riviera, you've got the Languedoc-Roussillon. The Languedoc-Roussillon, for example, the average house price there is about 180,000 for a 3-bedroom home, whereas in Brittany you could buy a 3-bedroom home for 80 to 100,000. If you're in the Côte d'Azur, you'd be looking at around 300,000. So it really does depend on the area to where you are, but the northwest of France is definitely, and the western parts of France is definitely more affordable than the south.
And on the subject of the market, Joan Straub asks, well, you've answered her question, what's the market like at the moment? But she says, we have a house that has been on sale for 2 years and we want to move further south and they're in the Vienne. Perhaps they ought to try it with Leggett, or I mean, some rural houses do take a while to sell, don't they, in France?
Yeah, sorry, I lost the sound on the beginning of that question.
She's got a house in the Vienne that's not sold for 2 years.
Right. Well, there's usually, I mean, obviously countryside properties did used to take a lot longer to sell. However, now that we're seeing a lot of people moving out of cities into the countryside, obviously it could take, it could be a lot quicker. Usually if a property is taking that long to sell, there's something wrong with it. It's either the photographs aren't very good and it's not getting enough interest, or the price is too high. Generally speaking, those are the reasons why it won't sell, unless it's next to something like a motorway is going to be built, or that you're in the they're in the middle of a development area. There's lots of reasons why it wouldn't sell, but generally speaking, the Vienne's really popular, and it particularly now with countryside and Parisians being able to get there in a few hours, from cities. So hopefully that will change.
Brilliant. Okie doke. I mean, just slightly general advice, Robert. Adrian Hull says because of Brexit and COVID, they're actually going to look at the French market next year. So if they've got lots of time, what general advice would you give about approaching their search? I mean, they're cash buyers, they say.
Right. I don't know if the advice changes between now and next year.
Yeah.
I mean, you just have more time to consider things. So the point is to, do your research, take advice, decide what you want to achieve, how you're buying, succession, inheritance, like I talked about earlier. You've got more time to plan. So, and actually, that's so important that you do take the time to plan things through and decide what you really want. Because that's where people fall down, right? I mean, it's they moved to France and they decided after they arrived, for example, the one person owns more than the other, and I'm going to give some money to the other. Well, we can do that in the UK, but automatic accrual doesn't exist in France. So you go, oh, we should have done it before we left. Well, yeah, it's a bit like the taking 25% from the pension earlier. The point is you have to consider these things before you move. So if you've got the time, make sure that you really sit down and analyze all the potential pitfalls, which is where people like Barbara and myself can help. But
yeah, and if like the lady with the house in the Vienne who now wants to move to the south of the Pyrenees, it's people move around a lot, they discover other parts, they might want more sun, seemingly. Just back on the safe ground of tax, Robert, what Stuart Alford asks, what are the tax implications for living in France but commuting to the UK and working there? Will I be double taxed?
Right, you can never be double taxed, because the point is the tax treaty will always make sure that you're not. But if you're commuting to the UK and salaried in the UK and working there, it's based on where you are sitting when you do the work. So if you are sitting in the UK, in a UK office doing the work there, then it is the UK that taxes that. Now, it doesn't make you UK tax resident. That's quite important, because I've seen this be confused a lot. So you're still French tax resident, but you're taxed on one element in the UK. The French will still assess you on that. Yeah, they won't tax you on it, but it'll form part of the assessment. I won't go into the intricacies, but it's basically important to understand. Just because it's taxed in the UK, it doesn't mean the French aren't interested in it. They still want to assess it.
Okay, and Barbara, going back a step, we touched on mortgages, but in some countries it's got a bit trickier to get mortgages post-COVID. What can you just give us a snapshot of what you've noticed in France?
There is a difference between whether you are staying resident in the UK. It's much easier to get a French mortgage if you're just buying a holiday home in France. Okay. Because if you're planning to move permanently to France, lock, stock and barrel, then the French banks, the French lenders are going to be concerned about how you're going to be able to afford the repayments on the mortgage. If you're giving up your income stream in the UK, okay, you're leaving your job in the UK to move to France, then the banks are going to say, well, how are you going to afford this mortgage once you settle in France? So obviously, if you've got a business that you're going to be setting up in France, or continuing an online business, for example, once you're in France, then that's okay. Or if you've got pension investments or other investments that the lenders, the French banks, will look at, then again, you might be okay. But you can't just think we're going to move permanently to France and then apply at the same time for a French mortgage, because the banks will not look at you, without that guarantee of a stable income stream to support the mortgage. So I'd say for those who are remaining in the UK, buying a holiday home, then that's a much more certain prospect.
Brilliant. Thank you. There's quite a niche question for you, Jo. What are the rules on taking your own cars and motorbikes to France, says Paul Levers?
Well, obviously you can drive wherever you like in any country. If you're becoming a permanent resident in France, though, you would need to, after a year, because you won't be able to be insured on it, you'll need to change it to French registration plates, where you just go to the prefecture and you have to pay for a carte grise and whatever it is, and then you get you register the car in France. It's really difficult if you're using commercial vehicles. There's quite a long process if you're going to be bringing a van over. Sometimes it might be better if you're going to be permanently in France to sell the van in the UK and then buy something in France. If it's a holiday home, there's no problem at all. You can go backwards and forwards. And there are also, if you have classic cars, you can take out classic car insurance, which means they're not driven all the time, and you can keep them on the number plates that they're already registered on. But for everyday use, you will only be allowed to be insured on an English plated car between 6 months to a year, depending on the insurance company.
Brilliant. Okay. And Jackie DeVries asks, so do you have, there's quite a lot of confusion about these dates. She says, do you have to be 90 days in France before the 31st of December 2020? And I think you clarified no, didn't you?
No, no. You could arrive a few days before, but you do need to register with the prefecture to say that you have arrived. Here's my contract. I just want you to know I'm living here type thing. And then apply for your carte séjour before June.
And can you explain for the viewer and indeed me, what's the prefecture? Is that the town hall, or how would they find that?
Yeah, the town, it's basically the town hall. They do everything there, from driving licenses, you can go there to register for things, births and deaths, etc. are registered there as well. So it is like the town hall. And for, first of all, I would register with your local mairie to let them know that you've moved there, let them know so that they're aware of it, and also for the post office. That's really important. A lot of people forget that, but if you don't give your name in at the post office, you won't receive any post. Because a lot of houses are all done by the name of the person and not by the actual address, although they have started changing that recently and putting in some proper street names. So yeah, then I would definitely go to the prefecture, which is like the town hall. You get a ticket, you sit in a queue, and you go to whatever desk is relevant to let them know that you are moving to France as such. There's loads of help in France as well. People, there's lots of set-up companies that can help set up businesses, etc., and all that type of thing, that will be able to help you through the process, particularly if you don't speak the language.
Okay, great. And I'm going to direct a financial question, or economic question rather, to you, Robert. Lisa Farrington asks, what's the view in France of the looming recession post-COVID? Do you foresee a downturn in tourism? And well, I'll come to Jo on purchases, but how do you see the situation shaping up, Robert?
Yeah, I think that we're going to see certainly a recession. How long it lasts depends on how long the illness lasts, which is impossible for me to comment on. But the point is, there's certainly going to be a slowdown in certain things. Some businesses will do better. Some businesses, more businesses, will do worse. So yeah, I think that we're going to see a slowdown. It just depends what shape that looks like. Is it going to be something that lasts a long time, or is that something that's going to be fairly brief? I think a recession, i.e. 2 quarters of negative growth globally, is a must. It's going to happen. You can't just stop a business, which as many people have, and expect it not to be a problem. Lots of people have commented, well, I've had bad years where I've been down 60%, 70%. But never 100%, because I've had to close. So yeah, economically, of course, we're going to see a downturn, and it'll last as long as the illness lasts.
Yeah, well, we're all going to have to deal with that. And Jo, I mean, a lot of people move to France, and run gîtes, get an income, be chambre d'hôte, and some of them obviously have written off most of this summer. But do you think that'll put off buyers who have that appetite for, you know, sort of having a new lifestyle with a bit more work-life balance and tapping into France's historically, you know, best in the world tourism?
It's a difficult one really, because if you're buying a gîte business, for example, generally speaking, you won't be able to get a mortgage on that, because they won't let you have a mortgage on somebody else's income, because you could run it in a totally different way. So if you're buying a gîte business, you usually are buying it for cash, generally speaking, unless it's a holiday home, and then obviously you're basing it on your UK income. This year has been particularly bad, all the hospitality industry. You know, there haven't been bookings. We are now seeing bookings all in the local areas, particularly where we are here in the southwest. The gîtes are now full, because particularly with property hunters, you know, we've got people coming from all over France to the countryside, and they're booking up. The Brits are starting to come back in now. The Belgians are back in now. So, you know, they are getting full again. And, you know, France is one of the biggest tourist countries in the world. We have 92 million tourists visit France every year. So, you know, when things do start to get back to normal, I think you know, those businesses still will be successful. And the fact that France is quite central for driving. So even if the flights go down again, or, you know, the routes are cancelled, etc., you can still drive to France, whether that's from the UK or the 8 bordering countries that surround France. So I think the tourist industry will survive. It's just had quite a bad time at the moment as such.
Yeah. A question for anyone on the panel, hands up. My mother was a French national. Does that make our application for residency in France any more straightforward? Any takers?
Well, if she's a French national, she has a French passport, I presume.
Well, yeah.
So the mother does.
Yeah. Oh, you mean for the daughter?
Her mother is a French national.
Well, she would need to apply for a French passport herself then, if she wants to become a French citizen, which is different to French residency. A French citizen, you would have to take a French test and you'd have to go through all those formalities to become a citizen, but to become a resident, you don't.
Okay. Barbara, a quick question. I'm just going to whiz through as many quick questions as we can before the end of the session. Again, to do with running a business. Tracy McInnes asks, if you want to run a property as a B&B, but you don't have French residency, is that possible?
Well, I'm not sure how they would run it as a B&B if they're not there.
Well, maybe they would get someone else to run it locally. I don't know.
I suppose they could have a manager in, you know, then yes, there's no problem. I think you have to let the local town hall, the mairie, know that you're operating a B&B, a chambre d'hôte, or whatever from the premises. But yes, if they put a manager in, I don't see a problem, as long as, you know, the accounts are done and lodged with the local tax office to show the income that it's earning. That should be fine.
Brilliant. Another slightly a tax question from Chris Farr. Is he allowed to buy a house in France by using my company in England to buy it? I don't know whether that or Robert might be.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend it.
No.
I've seen it a few times over the last 25 years, and it always ends badly. Every time.
Okay.
Never goes well. There's always a problem with the French fisc, the tax office. It always has a problem. So based on experience, I would tell you to not do that. I would suggest you don't do that.
Great. Okay. Well, he can get in contact with you for any further insights on that. Yeah. An interesting question from Miss M. We've just seen the British government have rumours of a stamp duty holiday for 6 months on a property under 500k. Are the French government launching any initiatives to get home buyers into the market? Maybe they don't need to.
Not at the moment. Yeah, not at the moment, I don't think. I mean, at the moment, the French market has been stronger than it's ever been. It is extremely strong at the moment. Interest rates are really low, and it's pushing people to buy and sell. So at this stage, I don't think there is. But as Robert says, if we go into recession, things might change.
Okay, brilliant. Joe, a question for you from Victoria Birchall. What is the reasonable amount to ask off of an asking price or to negotiate for a property that has been on the market for a year?
This again depends. There's lots of different situations that the vendor would be in, so it's always best to ask your agent or find out as much information as possible. If it's been on the year and it's an inheritance, you might, the family's inherited, there might be 5 people on the deeds and all 5 of them have to agree. So it could be quite tricky. We would usually suggest between 5 and 10%. However, if the property, say, was 200 grand and it's now selling at 150, they may already have reduced it and they might not be willing to drop it anymore. Or there might be situations where it's still showing at a price, like it might be showing at 200, and yet they've told the agent, look, we really want to move, we want to move quickly, we'll take 140. So it really depends on the situations of the vendor. You have to be very careful with the French because they can be very insulted if you put in too low an offer, and they won't sell it to you even if you came back at the asking price. So do be careful with that. Don't go in too low, because if they feel insulted, they won't sell it to you. Whereas the Brits are much more sort of, yes, we'll sell the house. That's the most important thing. And it depends on the vendors. We found that Dutch vendors in particularly, they'll put in very low offers, but they won't budge when they're selling. So, it depends on the nationality of who's selling the property, and what we can recommend is the best sort of discount that you might be able to get on an offer.
The Dutch always love a bargain, don't they?
Apart from when they're selling.
Here is another question for you, Joe, really, from Declan McCulloch. Is there potential for retirees to rent a property for, say, 10 months in the year from someone in the UK who may use their house for perhaps just 2 months in the summer? Or maybe there's a legal issue dimension to that as well. What do we think?
Yeah, of course, they can rent the property, but they've got to look at the new Brexit rules, because, they might not be allowed to stay there for more than 3 months. We really don't know until Brexit's sorted out. You could go and rent the property for 3 months, and then the visa's only allowing you to be there for 90 days. So we really don't know until the Brexit sort of deal is done how long you can rent that property. Obviously, he could come across and become a French resident because he's going to be there longer than he is in the UK fiscally. So he'd become then a tax resident, but as a retiree, probably not. But again, until we know the Brexit rules, we don't really know how long somebody could stay in a property, or they'd have to apply for residency.
Yeah, okay. And Barbara, Simone Bratt-Lowe asks about the tax on a second home. The purchase tax on a second home is the same as if it's a principal home. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. When you're buying a property, whether it's to be a main residence or a second home, you need to be budgeting for between 7 and 8% on top of the purchase price, and that covers the notaires fee and the purchase tax. So the purchase tax is just under 6% now, and regardless of if it's going to be a main residence or a second home.
And what about ongoing costs? Would you have to pay the social charges, property tax on owning the property?
So just for any property in France, then you have local taxes, annual local taxes, just like council tax in the UK. Okay, so you have the taxe d'habitation, the occupier's tax, and the taxe foncière, the land tax. Okay, so they are annual taxes, and they will vary according to the area where the property is, and also the size of the property and how much of the land is built on, and so on. So you have that. For higher value properties, there may be an annual wealth tax, which is called the real estate wealth tax, but that doesn't kick in unless the property is worth more than 1.3 million euros. In fact, the net value is worth more than 1.3 million. So, but otherwise, no, I mean, the other taxes which come into buying and selling is the capital gains tax. When you sell, there's a potential for capital gains tax in France if it's a second home and it's not your main residence. But you have to have made a gain, so a difference between what you paid for it and what you're selling, in order for that to be taxable. And there are various sort of taper reliefs. For the longer that you've owned the property, then the less likely it is that you have to pay any capital gains. But that's very much Robert's area.
Okay, well, I've got a question for Robert on tax. Christine Deadman asks, can I confirm that if I work in France for a UK company who pay me as self-employed, do I pay tax in the UK?
Right, it's all about where you do the work. So if you're sitting in France and doing the work in France, you have your laptop in your lounge or you have an office somewhere, if it's taking place in France, it's a French activity and the French will want to tax and assess it. But if you get on a plane and go to the UK and the work takes place in the UK, then they'll say, well, under the terms of double tax treaty, that's taxed in the UK because that's where the activity is taking place. So hopefully that answers the question.
Brilliant. And we've obviously got some Dutch interest after mentioning. Evelyn Burt asks, I'm Dutch and my boyfriend is British. Is it advisable to get married before buying a property together, also in relation to Brexit? Robert?
It depends what you're trying to achieve. I mean, we get some people who move to France who want to be their finances to be joint. So if they buy a house, they want the house to go to the survivor, and so on. If you don't get married, for example, buy a house jointly, what happens is that the survivor pays 60% inheritance tax. That's 60, just so you know. We basically no allowance. So it depends what you're trying to dodge and trying to achieve. Some people say, well, no, I've got kids and they've got kids, and I'm going to leave my money to my children, and therefore no real problem. But you don't have to get married. You can pax. So more like a civil partnership, which is much more flexible and easier to break than the civil partnership in the UK. So there are all sorts of ways and means of getting around the rules. But the point is to decide what it is that you want to achieve, because people want very different outcomes. Some people privilege their children's rights over their own. Some people privilege their surviving spouse or their partner. So it really depends what you're trying to achieve.
Okay, thank you. Barbara, someone's just picking up on your point about purchase taxes. Does the 7 to 8% you mentioned include legal fees?
It includes the fees of the notaire in France, yes. If you were to use a UK-based specialist such as myself to help with the purchase, then no, our fees are on top of that.
Okay, great. And Joe, we're just going to have to squeeze in a couple more questions. Sarah Moore says, what is the first thing I need to do if I'm a cash buyer and looking for a holiday home in France?
Well, choose your location, obviously, where, you know, it depends on look at your budget, look at the different areas, because the areas really vary in prices. The further south you go, the shorter your budget will go. You know, it won't be able to stretch as far as if it was up in the north. And then make a list of all the things you want from your holiday home. Leisure facilities, do you want to be near the coast? Do you want to be in a working community? You know, make a short list of everything, look at the budget, and then do your research on the area. I would try and do recce trips if you can, you know, to come out for weekends, spend some time in the town, you know, in the villages, etc. Look at a few properties in the area so you get a feel for what your money can buy in those areas, and then see which towns you actually really like, you know, and it has all the facilities that you need.
Brilliant. Well, look, thank you. We've run out of time, but a few people are asking, can they contact you guys after the session? We're going to put your details on the webinar recording, which is going to be available shortly on the placeinthesun.com webinar library. We're also, there's a lot of complex information to take on there, so we're going to put the frequently asked questions up online in the next couple of weeks with the recording, so listeners can go in and tap into all that really good information that you've shared. So thank you very much indeed to all of you. and let's hope we can all get to France as soon as possible and start having a holiday or looking for a property. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much.